Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you very much for being here with us today. My name is Jose Antonio Mejia, and I work at the Inter-American Development Bank. Again, it is great for you to take the time to accompany us here today. As you will see today, what brings us here is a work in progress, a well-known tool, adapted to the particularities of National Statistical Offices, which we hope we can become an important instrument to assess statistical capacity by focusing directly on the personnel of National Statistical Offices. A tool that will complement instruments already existing that are already available, and to help provide a broader perspective and hence the possibility of developing concrete paths to improving statistical capacity. As usual, this is a Zoom meeting and you are very familiar with this. As usual, we will be taking questions and answers through the tool at the bottom of your screen. And after this very brief introduction, I want to pass the floor to Jimena Clark, former director of the National Statistical of Chile and member of the technical advisor of the GPSDD, who will be the moderator for today. Jimena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jose Antonio. I'm going to present immediately. I'm going to start presenting immediately our invitees for today. So starting with Christian Schuster. For those of you who doesn't know him, Christian is professor in public management at the University College London and co-director of the Center for People Analytics in Government. His core research expertise is in data analytics for people management in government. He has published extensive on this topic with over 50 academic articles and policy publications based on collaborations with more than 24 governments in Europe, Latin America, Asia, and Africa. His latest book is Motivating Public Employees, published with Cambridge University Press. He holds a PhD from the London School of Economics. Then we will also have part of the presentation from Jose Antonio Mejia. Probably most of you know him. Jose Antonio works as modernization of the state lead specialist at the Inter-American Development Bank, where he specializes in strengthening of statistical capacity. He holds a master's degree in public policy from Georgetown University and a master's degree in economics from George Washington University. He served as vice president of the first governing board of Mexico's National Statistics and Geography Institute, INEGI, between the years 2008 and 2012. Both of them will present, as I said, the very interesting tool regarding the capacity of NSOs. And then we will have the comments presented by Maria Esther Cutimbo. Maria Esther has worked at the National Institute of Statistics and Information of Peru, INEI, for many years. She is currently advisor to INEI's chief. She holds a master in public management from EUSIM Business School in Spain, a Master of Statistics and Information Management from the Universidad Nacional San Marcos of Peru, and a post-degree in Governance and Political Management from George Washington University. And then we will also have the comments from Jan Meyer-Sahlin. Professor Meyer-Sahlin is he is professor of political science at the University of Nottingham, School of Politics and International Relations. He holds a PhD from the London School of Economics and was a Max Weber Fellow and a Fernand Braudel Senior Fellow at the European University Institute in Florence. Professor Meyer-Sahlin's work focuses on civil service reform and management in Europe and in developing countries. He is founder of the Center for People Analytics Government. So after the presentations of our very important invitees for today, please, Christian, the floor is yours.
Jose Antonio, do you want to go first?
Yes. Thank
sorry,
you.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Just one last thing. I'm really sorry. For those of you that are listening today, please remember that we have this section of questions and answers. So you can start right now presenting your question that we will address at the end of the presentations. I'm sorry for the interruption.
No, well, thank you, Jimena, and thank you, Christian. Yeah, no, as I was saying in the beginning, you know, this is a joint effort that we have been developing for a couple of years with the Christian's team at the University College of London and other colleagues in other institutions and the Inter-American Development Bank. And the idea, the motivation behind this is that, you know, when we look at the statistical capacity, at least in the statistical world, we are focused on, you know, if countries are aligned to certain standards, if they follow best practices. There are a number of tools to assess statistical capacity from this perspective, from the perspective of standards, from the perspective of production, and from other views. But there is not an instrument that looks at the main asset of any institution, you know, at their employees. So this exercise, and if we can move to the next one, Christian, that is the motivation behind this. And I'm sorry, I skipped so I'm going to tell you a little bit more about why we are engaging in this project. And then Christian will go into the added value and the methodology of the survey. He will give us some, some numbers and some findings from a pilot that we did in Peru first, which we're very grateful to NAE for the support. And then he'll close with some conclusions. So in terms of the motivation, as I was saying, more than once, the director of the United Nations Statistical Division, Stefan Schweinfest, has said that National Statistical Offices, they spend their life and their whole goal in life is to measure and to measure well. And, but it's measuring everything and anything that can be measured in a society, in an economy, but there is not that much effort in measuring themselves. And, and measuring themselves, not only, again, in terms of their standards and their methodologies, but also particularly not in terms of internal management practices and attitudes towards their employees. So we think that this instrument that we're presenting today is an important advancement in this area of opportunity to improve statistical systems by focusing on the employees of national statistical offices. So again, if we agree that the main goal of a national statistical office is to measure well, and for that it needs to have good capacity, and that capacity is based on the competence, motivation, and commitment of their employees, then it is very important to see, to manage those employees and to make sure that they are given their best effort, that they have the best tools, and that they are happy in their doing what they do. So, to address these challenges, of course, we need to measure, and and measuring implies knowing, to know how competent and how motivated and how committed National Statistical Office employees are. And, once we have these measurements, the experience from this sort of instruments in other sectors is that, with that information, it's easier to understand, how human resource management practices affect the competence, the motivation, and the commitment of employees at national statistical offices. So this is, from this experience in other sectors, the idea has been to bring that experience to national statistical offices to have an instrument that is comparable across countries and that will give the managers, directors of national statistical offices tools to better manage their biggest asset, the employees of national statistical offices. So that's where this employee survey comes from. So with that, I will give back the floor to Christian.
Thanks very much. Now, many of you might, of course, be in countries where you already have staff surveys. So in the last 20 years, a number of OECD countries and more recently also countries in the Global South have started introducing government-wide employee surveys. So the United States 20 years ago, for instance, started introducing an annual government-wide federal employee survey. And these are really helpful for the reasons that Jose Antonio just laid out. They help you understand key employee attitudes, to help you understand management practices. But from a perspective of a national statistical office, in some sense, they're not enough. And they're not enough even if you have them for two reasons. One is if you have a government-wide employee survey, that of course needs to capture the generalities of government in general and is not really focused on the context of national statistical offices. But if you think about employees in national statistical offices, then there are a number of characteristics that you would really like them to have. And that would be really important to check whether they do have them, right? So things like, for instance, statistical competency of employees is plausibly really important for the quality of statistics that the institute is producing. The statistical integrity of employees. So do employees prioritize integrity when they collect statistics, when they process statistics, when they analyze statistics, when they publish statistics? That's again really important for the quality of statistics. And so measuring that is really important. And the second downside of just having government-wide employee surveys, if you have them, is that they allow a national statistical office to compare themselves with other government organizations, but not really with organizations that do what they do, which is other statistics offices. And precisely because of that, basically, this IDB survey was created. So this is a survey instrument that is measuring employee attitudes and management practices, but with very much a focus and adaptation to the context of national statistical offices. Because it is run in a lot of different national statistical offices, it then allows each national statistical office to benchmark itself question by question. So you can, for instance, see whether your recruitment practices are different from the way that other national statistical offices recruit their statistics officials. And if you see that different, for instance, if you think the quality is lower, then you can go at a really granular level and try to understand how the kind of mechanisms they have for selecting versus the kind of mechanisms that you have for selecting. Or if you can see that your statistical competence, for instance, scores lower than that of other national statistical offices, you can see the precise dimension of competence where you might be lacking. So it's very much a learning exercise at a very granular level that can lead to very specific and actionable management insights. The way the questionnaire was designed is that it can be sent to all employees of a national statistical office. So you're not excluding some employees in the institution, but at the same time, it works with different modules. So if you're telling us that you're a statistician, for instance, you have some modules. If you're telling us that you're an enumerator, you might have some other modules. So it's both generalizably applicable, but also then adapted to different groups. We're currently rolling it out in 16 countries. So later on, I'll show you some findings from a pilot in Peru, and then hopefully at a later point, we can present you the cross-country findings. For all of these national statistical offices, as is usual when you run a survey of these kinds, we basically produce management reports and dashboards for them with the results, for them to be able to learn and improve management based on the survey results. But then, of course, we also have data from 16 countries to produce a best practice report on how to manage employees. Now, while the survey is run in Latin America and the Caribbean, it's very much designed as an instrument that's applicable to any national statistical office. And we very much hope that after the project, it might be of interest for other national statistical offices as well to apply it to themselves. Now, what does the instrument actually measure? The instrument basically has two parts. The first part covers what we think of as key employee attitudes and competencies. So basically, key features, characteristics of employees that we would want any employee or group of employees to have. We would like them to be motivated. We would like them to be engaged with their jobs, satisfied, competent, committed to the organization, and acting with integrity. And this combines both generic measures, but also measures very much related to the context of the NSO. And then, of course, if you know that you're motivated, or your employees are less motivated or less engaged, that in of itself is often not very actionable. You know that you have something to improve, but you don't know how. And so the second part of the questionnaire measures a number of actionable management practices, which we know are related to these attitudes, which we know are related to motivation or competence or satisfaction. So for instance, the quality of recruitment, the quality of performance management, the quality of leadership, or the quality of remote work. Now, methodologically, the way this is run is an online survey. It takes 20 minutes for employees to complete. If you ever want to run it in your institution, you can do it in one of two ways. You can either do it as a random sample, which means a small subset of your employees get the survey. Then you can basically produce one management report for the organization as a whole, or you run a census, which means every employee in every unit has an opportunity to respond. Then you can get a management report for the organization, but also for every unit in the organization. So every department, every directorate. It's a survey that will be available, or that is available in English and Spanish. And just to give you a sense of sort of where do these validated measures come from, because we're trying to convince you these are validated measures. So the survey combines, on the one hand, a number of international measures that are part of the Global Survey of Public Servants. These are general, internationally validated measures used in employee surveys in government around the world to capture things that are general, that are not particular to the NSO. So in an NSO, for instance, we want people to be engaged with their jobs, but we might not need a specific measure for that. We can take a general work engagement measure. So there's some generically validated measures that already exist from this global survey, which is an initiative that was founded by a number of academics, Frank Fukuyama at Stanford, Jan Meyer-Zaling, who will present later today, also myself and colleagues at the World Bank. And then there are a number of measures that are added to that capture the particularities of the context of a National Statistical Office. And these were piloted and then validated with colleagues in Peru. And our colleague from Peru will later on tell you what they were able to do in terms of improvements based on these measures. But before that, let me just give you a glimpse of what you can learn from the survey. And the survey has a range of modules, a range of management practices, a range of attitudes. I'll just give you 4 numbers to hopefully convince you that this is useful data for any National Statistical Office to have. So the first point of data that I want to give you is about statistical competencies. So in the survey, we're assessing statistical competencies. But before we do that, we also ask our respondents whether, in fact, these statistical competencies are important for their work tasks. And when we think of statistical competencies, we're really interested in foundational statistical concepts that are important, that we thought ex ante would be important for a lot of jobs in statistics, things like understanding probabilities or descriptive statistics or correlations, for instance. And when we ask our respondents in Peru whether they thought they were important for their daily work, they basically told us overwhelmingly that yes, these are important or very important. And then we included in the survey, if you want to call it an exam or a quiz or a test, so a number of questions that assess whether individuals can in fact correctly handle each of these concepts. So these are in a way quiz questions, statistics questions. And what we found is that even though the overwhelming majority of employees thought these competencies were important for their work, they struggled with these questions. They struggled with understanding these concepts. So 41% of quiz questions were answered correctly. But what is interesting is that there's a lot of variation between different dimensions of statistical competencies. And so that, of course, means you can pick out the ones when you think about improving your training, for instance, or offering a new training, or changing the competencies you assess in recruitment. You can very much focus on the types of statistical dimensions where you score lower. And our colleague from Peru will later on talk a little bit about how they in fact did that to improve. Before we do that, let me just give you a second number just to give you a sense of sort of the diverse things that can be learned from the instrument. In the survey instrument, we also measure integrity and statistical integrity. So the idea that in the everyday life of statistics officials often have ethical dilemmas. For instance, they have family pressures and they might conflict with statistical integrity. Think of an enumerator that needs to pick up the child, but still needs to complete very quickly another survey that they need to finish. They have pressures or dilemmas between political pressures and statistical integrity. They might have pressures between career incentives and statistical integrity. And so we have a number of scenarios that basically look at how statistics officials respond to these dilemmas. Do they prioritize statistical integrity when faced with these dilemmas on the job. And here's again one example from Peru, where we have one particular scenario here, and what we find is that the employees are overwhelmingly able to understand what kind of behavior would be ethical in this situation. They're overwhelmingly finding it unacceptable to behave unethically in the situation. But then if they see a colleague doing it, they're not always willing to talk to management about that. And that, of course, gives you a sense of the employees have some significant ethical awareness here, but that doesn't translate into ethical reporting. That, of course, is always a challenge because you're talking about reporting what your colleagues are doing. But from a management perspective, it's important because colleagues are often at the front line. They're the first people to see when another colleague is behaving unethically, and you would like them to be willing to report that to their superiors or to management. And so ethical reporting here, for instance, is one thing that the survey would tell you is something you might potentially be wanting to work on. So these are just two glimpses from the data. As I mentioned, the survey has a range of other dimensions, but I hope it gives you a sense that these kind of measurements are really helpful for evidence-based improvements to how statistics officials are managed. So with that, let me conclude and say that the survey of NSO employees enables NSOs to apply the same rigor to measurement that they use to measure other parts, the economy, the society, to measuring themselves, to measure their own internal management practices and their employees. The way the survey design is very much focused on providing key evidence to improve employee management. So not just measuring things like motivation, but also measuring the management levers that can help you improve that. And the way we do that is by having a lot of measures that are tailored to the context of NSOs and by allowing NSOs to benchmark themselves. And I hope that in the next iteration of this presentation, when we have done the 16 surveys, we can show you these benchmarking exercises and what can be learned from that. And I should lastly also note that the questionnaire, of course, will be freely available for application by other NSOs. And we very much hope that this is an instrument that could be used beyond Latin America. It's definitely one that is designed with that in mind. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Christian. Just by listening to you, I wish I had this instrument by the time I was the head of the Chilean NSO. And I hope everyone that is listening to us will have the opportunity to apply it. So having said that, very interesting, by the way, the two examples you mentioned in terms of result. And so right now, Maria Esther, please, we listen to your comments. You have 7 minutes, just for you to know.
Thank you, Jimena. It's a pleasure for me to attend that meeting. I was asked to be brief, so I will try to do my best. As Christian explained, the pilot concludes in two aspects. Referring to statistical competence, the pilot showed that the most of the INAI employees perceive statistical skills as important in their work, but have difficulties with basic concepts. Related to integrity, the pilot showed that a minority of employees have difficulty identifying ethical dilemmas in their statistics work, resolving them appropriately, or reporting colleagues' ethical misconduct to manage. So what we do? The first thing that we do was review and update of the annual training plan. Our annual training plan have two targets: the National Statistical System and general public, and the INAI staff of national level. In the first case, we great emphasis on descriptive statistics, inferential statistics, data analysis, and etc. To lesser extent, economies such as construction and interpretation of economic and social indicators. The plan for our staff, we adjust of the annual programming of course in statistics, economics, and computer science by basic, intermediate, and advanced levels. Also, we prepared a self-learning course by e-learning modality in descriptive, inferential, and probability statistics. Related to the integrity, all of you will be agree with us, is a very complex matter. It's not just about ethics training, but rather undertaking actions to educate and integrity. This must be permanent, dynamic, integrated, and fully multidimensional. There are some aspects that my institution has been applying for some years, such as integrity training, mass messages related with integrity. Our field staff talks with the highest sectorial authorities who show them how their work impacts in the target population. But we know that is not enough. We must design a set of practice, policies, and decisions to make the most of our human capital, enhance their performance, encourage them to involve, get on the same page, and achieve a collective well-being with focus on our institutional values. This survey, the survey of employees of National Statistical Office, forced us to stop and not only reflect in depth, but also to investigate and learn more about the good practice of our peers in an international level. Thank you, Jimena.
You're mute, Jimena.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just was saying that even with Maria Esther was very brief, she was very, very specific about very interesting things that you could do with the result of the survey. Some of them are simpler than the others, but there is always things you can do. So having said that, please, Jan, we'll listen to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ximena. Let me share my screen briefly. So where do we have this here? And I hope you can see this now. Yes, so thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to comment and add to the presentations that have been given so far. What I would really like to do is to talk a little bit about how public employee surveys have been used by governments or by individual institutions in order to improve people management in government more broadly or in particular institutions. And I've got two examples for you here. I'm speaking really on behalf of the Center for People Analytics and Government. So this is something that I'm doing together with Kim Saas-Mikkelsen from Roskilde and Christian Schuster, whom you have already heard. Over the last, roughly 6-7 years, we have conducted surveys in more than 20 countries around the world, really like Latin America, Europe, Asia and Africa, with well over 150,000 public servants. So we have actually seen quite a few in the meanwhile. But of course, the big question at the end of the day is like, so what have we been able to get out of these surveys? I've got two examples. They are both from outside Latin America. One is from Kosovo in the Western Balkans in Eastern Europe, and the other one will be from Nepal. For Kosovo, it is a slightly more general example. So here we conducted a civil service survey in 2017 at the central and the local government level. It was the first ever national survey of civil servants in Kosovo at that time. And the evidence showed at that time that there were considerable issues surrounding the recruitment and selection procedure. It was formally based on merit, but in practice, the merit principle wasn't really applied. Problems of politicization, nepotism were fairly widespread. At that time, we produced a report. We were invited by the Minister of Public Administration, who convened a larger workshop for us where we presented then the results. And shortly after, a public administration reform working group was set up. And as part of this PAR working group, it was planned to revise the civil service law. And our evidence then at that time was taken on by this working group and was used to redesign, to revise the recruitment procedure. So at that time, one of the core changes that was introduced with the new civil service law was a new examination procedure that strengthened the written element and also added some central elements to the procedure. So it had quite a significant impact. It really helped the members of the working group to understand where the main problem actually was and how to justify as well towards, for instance, the political level and some members of the international organizations, what had to be changed and how to actually go about it. So this evidence was quite instrumental for them. The new law was then adopted in 2019 and has been enforced since 2020. The other example that I would like to briefly introduce to you concerns Nepal, and in Nepal, specifically the tax administration. So in Nepal as well, we conducted the first ever survey of civil servants in 2018, so just a year after Kosovo. And there was really a major novelty at that time. After that, we again produced the report and went there for presentations, and the evidence was quite clear that it showed in the area of ethics and integrity that there was generally a limited ethical awareness really of ethical dilemma situations and unethical situations. Moreover, it was quite interesting to see across the civil service and I mean, really across the entire central government civil service, that there was very little experience with ethics trainings and generally a fairly low level of ethics code awareness. There existed a code of conduct, but the awareness was fairly low. So the tax authority at that time picked up these findings, and in the context of their own efforts to revise a new strategy and action plan for the tax administration, the Inland Revenue Department, they committed themselves to improving their ethics and integrity management and to establish and develop and apply an ethics training for the tax officers across the country. We then went back to the tax authorities and spoke to them and were asked to develop a tailor-made ethical leadership training for tax officers. And this training has now been in the field since the autumn of last year. I mean, obviously the pandemic slowed us down a little bit, otherwise we would have started a bit earlier. But since September last year, we have trained tax officers in Nepal. This is still in process at the moment and will be completed in the spring. And at the end of the training, we are then again conducting another survey. So on top of the more general senior civil service survey, as Christian had actually outlined it earlier as well, we developed a very specific tool for the tax administration in order to initially audit the level of ethical awareness and the experience with ethics and integrity management. And after the training, which we are in the process of implementing, we then will conduct another audit at the very end to evaluate the actual impact of our training there. So yeah, this is, I think, a very special, specific impact. And this also means I'm at the end of my presentation. So I hope, of course, that this has been useful and provides some inspiration for the work of the National Statistics Offices. And if you have questions, you are very welcome to ask them later on.
Thank you so much, Jan. It's very interesting, this ethical leadership training that you just mentioned. And in fact, I'm going to start by reading some of the questions that we already have. To start, people is already very enthusiastic about implementing the survey. So many of them have asked if this is going to be available or who to contact, or in particular, if for Central America, for instance, it's going to be also an interest in implementing it. So maybe Jose Antonio or Christian could answer how to proceed, how to contact you in order to implement that. But then we also have a question for Jan, which is what motivated, for instance, Kosovo government to do the survey, or in Nepal? Basically, in a very figuratively way, they are asking, how do you open the door and enter the room? How do you convince people to do this type of service, which sometimes treat very sensitive issues like the ethical one? So please, maybe we can start with Jose Antonio.
Well,
or Christian.
Yes, no, we are, we in our first wave of the survey, we have asked National Statistical Offices to participate, and we have a first group of 16 countries, which we are working with right now. Of course, then in the future, the idea is that just like other evaluation instruments, this instrument will be available for countries to do it and to apply it themselves in a periodic way. And here, Christian, I don't know if you wanna add something as to when when we could make this questionnaire publicly available.
Yeah, sure. So just to complement that, as mentioned, I think it's very much our hope that this is a questionnaire that can be used around the world. So we spend a lot of time developing it, so it would be great if others can also make use of it. I think the publication date will be with the publication of the cross-country report, which is later in the year. But if you're interested in the questionnaire itself, I think you should always feel free to email us, even if the formal publication date is at a later date, and then we're very happy to chat with you about it. And I think there was a question about Central America. We are implementing the survey in a number of National Statistical Offices in Central America as well.
Shall I as well?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much for the question. So, I think I've got a few answers really for that. Specifically in the case of Kosovo, when we went there for the first time to conduct this kind of survey, one serious question was for them that they had implemented a law a few years earlier, and they just were when we explained to them what can we do with the civil service survey, it was clear that we can monitor the quality of the implementation of their civil service law. And this is something where they had anecdotal evidence, but basically they didn't know well enough how civil servants were experiencing human resources management practices. So there was how can we monitor the quality of the implementation of the laws that govern and regulate our human resources management? So that was quite straightforward. I can give you another couple of examples. In the case of Albania, we are just in the process of rolling out a survey there. They are going to prepare a new 5-year public administration reform strategy next autumn. They want evidence to understand what are our problems. And with the survey, we can provide some specific evidence on, on the attitudes of civil servants and the quality of human resources management practices. In the case of the OECD, SIGMA, OECD is often involved in monitoring countries that want to join the European Union. They get a lot of formal information about laws, for instance, or hard data that is provided by civil service agencies, but they don't know very much about how human resources management practices work across a large number of different institutions. So for the OECD, it was very helpful evidence to go beyond the central civil service agencies and to get a broader picture. Where are the islands of excellence? Where are the problem cases? Which parts of HRM work well? Which ones don't? Yeah. So I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of curiosity, interest in monitoring, and ambition to use the evidence in order to make things work better.
Thank you so much. We have another question, and maybe this one could be answered first by Maria Esther, and then maybe complemented by Jose Antonio. The answer relates to other type of instruments that are whose objective is to measure statistical capacity. For instance, the task of the IDB. So the question is, how do you feel there could be a complementarity between the task survey and this particular survey you are presenting today? This is one question. Again, Maria Esther and maybe Jose Antonio. And then we have another question, which is, how can we link survey result on lack of technical knowledge with capacity development initiatives from development partners? And also, how do you deal with cultural differences across countries? All of you could answer the latest question. So maybe we start with you, Maria Esther.
We think that the survey is an important tool because our institutions are focused doing surveys and it demands a lot of effort. But this survey allows us to stop and think and recognize the importance to have a good employees doing the best in their work. Really, we depend on their quality of work. If we don't know, we don't invest in there, we will have bad results. The survey is very important because it applies some questions and permit to see really in what level there are our works, no? So our workers. So I don't know, my English is not so good. I don't know if you understand me, but for us was an important lesson, no?
Okay. Would you like to complement, Jose Antonio?
No, yes, as I was saying at the beginning, I think that, I mean, for me, the relevance of this survey, of this instrument, is that unlike other instruments that look at the functions, you know, how good National Statistical Offices are doing the things that they are supposed to do. You know, if they do censuses, if they do surveys, how do they work with administrative records, if they are aligned to standards. This survey allows to look at the inside, at the functioning of the office. Well, how, you know, by focusing on the employees. So I do think that at some point, you know, the statistical community will have to develop a battery of instruments that can give us a 360-degree look of statistical capacity, right? Not only looking again at the alignment with the standards and the methodologies, but also at, you know, at how people feel working and how capable they feel, if they feel they have the tools. So I think that's, I mean, for me, that is the relevance of this of this.
Yeah, you are right. Thank you also so much. Another question regards something very important, which is how do we ensure that respondents are sincere in their answers? Because they might be aware that who is implementing the survey will know who is answering what. And so they might not be so honest when responding. And we know that usually these are surveys implemented not by DNSO, for instance, but from third parties. But still people it's kind of worried that the answer will be known with identifiers. So how do you ensure that this doesn't happen? And so maybe Christian and also Jan could answer that based on their experiences.
Sure. So there are two important aspects here. So one is, how can you make sure that respondents feel safe responding, that they feel like their answers are confidential? And one advantage of having an outside entity that runs the survey is precisely that it's not the manager itself that sees the response of the employee about the manager, but it's an outside entity without a vested interest that sees the responses first. And then, of course, when you run the survey, it's very important that you have a very clear informed consent sheet at the outset, where you emphasize confidentiality, where you emphasize the codes of conduct by which you're ruled. And then, of course, when you report the survey results, it's really important that the way you report them guarantees anonymity, so that basically people cannot be identified in any way based on the data that you deliver. So for instance, when we do management reports inside an NSO for different directorates, you have to have at least 10 respondents for one data point so that you wouldn't be able to tell sort of where this data point is coming from. And that's really, really important, because the second that employees feel like their response can be identified or is identified by their manager, you will not have a valid measurement instrument anymore. Then there's a second question about, okay, even in a world where employees feel like their individual response cannot be identified, maybe they respond with bias. And that could go in different ways, right? It sort of could mean that they want to make themselves look really good, or they want to make their organization look good, or they want to make their superior look really bad. So that could go in different ways. And so there are several safeguards that that you have here. So one is there are a number of questions that that are objective, that are harder to bias. So for instance, we have statistical competency questions that are right or wrong, like either you get the right answer or you don't. So it's harder for you to, you know, bias your answer one way or the other. There are a number of objective questions where you'd be slightly less worried about bias. So for instance, when we talk about performance management, we first just have a number of factual questions. You know, did you have a performance evaluation? Did you talk with your superior about the results of your evaluation? Did you set performance objectives in advance with your superior? Yes, no, where you could feel like for most employees, the incentive to be biased is relatively reduced. And then there are a number of perceptual questions where what you do is you use instruments that have been used elsewhere, that have been used to predict behavior, where you know that even if there are some biases, the average means tend to be informative. And then one thing that's of course also important is that unless these biases are different for different groups of employees in the organization, you would still be able to compare. Like if everybody wants to make the organization look good inside an organization, if different units have different rankings, that is still meaningful because everybody is in the organization facing that same incentive. And so that was a very lengthy methodological response to the question. I have to give you for that.
Yeah. John, if you want to add something.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really can largely echo what Christian was just saying, but I mean, it picks up also on a point that you mentioned earlier about, oh, when you do these surveys, I mean, they are very sensitive, right? And I think I didn't say much about that. So I think it's clear that when we conduct the surveys, we are committed to going through an ethical approval process, research ethics approval process at our institutions. So it's absolutely essential that we maintain the principles of anonymity, confidentiality, informed consent, etc. So we keep the data secure, etc. So when we speak to the partners in government, we always make clear at the very beginning that yes, we do this, it's sensitive, but we cannot share, you know, we can only share anonymized information at the very end. And I think, as Christian said, this obviously, you know, helps to make participants then also feel safer. Yeah. Yeah, so that's, I think, all I can say there. I'm happy otherwise later to say something about the issue of cultural diversity if you still want to follow up on that question. You know, please prompt me. Shall I raise that, refer to that? Okay, yeah. I thought it was a good point that you made earlier. So I think here it's quite important that there are two things. When it comes to the general civil service surveys, I mean, what we usually do is we pre-test the surveys when we go into the countries. So we try to make sure that the questions are properly understood in the particular context, and where necessary, otherwise we adapt the questions. Yeah, that's essential. At the same time, of course, we need to make sure that they are comparable, for instance, across the 16 countries. But the other part is when we would go, for instance, for something far more specific and tailor-made, let's say the tax administration in Nepal, we actually spend quite some time in the field, and we speak to the administration, we speak to the civil servants there. We try to understand what actually the nature of the problem is, and accordingly we tailor the instrument to the context. And in that way, you take into account cultural differences across institutions and across countries. Yeah. So you need to do actually quite a bit of homework before you can run some of the tailor-made surveys. Maybe Christian wants to add to that.
And in fact, this probably answered another question, which was, if this type of survey can be applied in other fields of study. And I guess you could kind of customize, but always taking into account the topics and the culture or other very particular characteristic, right? Now I have another question, which is related to the, to the context, which is basically the following. Sometimes you have a change in government, and at the same time, you have a change in the national director of NSOs. So does the survey somewhere includes questions regarding how these change affect the competencies of employees of the NSO? Do you have something in order to measure direct or indirectly that?
I'm very happy to speak to that. So yes, that's the, in short, the answer. So we have a question on how political transitions affect employees. And that's important because in some contexts, there's very little that happens with technical employees in National Statistical Directorates, and in others that have more politicized National Statistical Offices, a lot might happen. So yeah, that's an important part of understanding why you might see differences across countries, and so that's why we have it as a measure.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe to add one point there, Simena. I mean, we ask in the survey as well when civil servants have joined the organization, when they have joined the civil service. So with a few other questions, you can actually find out quite a lot about the impact of government changes. Yeah. So there are ways and means in the survey how you can tease out those kind of issues.
Yeah. The question I'm guessing also is also related to the fact that training programs are not short-term ones. So you need to have some time in order to see the result of that programs. And whenever you have a change of this particular type, sometimes programs are stopped or put it in a standby situation, and that not only generates uncertainty, but affect competences of people in some places, as you say, Christian. Then I believe this will be one of the last questions, which is from UNFPA Caribbean. There is a comment saying that they have embarked on a data appreciation assessment for the 22 countries in which they are working. And so they are interested in the survey as a component of this assessment. So the question is, when the tool is going to be shared, can stakeholders get permission to use the tool for other purposes? And if there will be published the finding as an aggregate per region, sub-region, or for individual countries? What are the plans regarding those last questions? Jose Antonio, maybe you want to answer?
Well, I will answer the easy one. That is, that the tool will be, it will be just publicly available for anybody to use, and as they see fit. And as for the other question, I will leave Christian to answer.
So the way that the data will be shared, or so the aggregates will be shared, I think is something we haven't finalized yet, so you'll have to forgive us that I will not give you a concrete answer. I think the most important thing for us, is that each institution that implements the survey gets a very robust management report for the organization, so they will know their numbers and they can compare it to the other NSOs. At the regional level, I think what we're most interested in is understanding best practices in management generally, rather than pinpointing specific countries. But at some point, it might be helpful or not to showcase specific countries. So you'll have to forgive us that we haven't written the regional report yet. And so after that is done, I think we can make a call on that. But I don't think for us the sort of key point is to identify individual countries. I think the key point is, if you have data from 16 countries, you can learn a lot about what works across national statistical offices in managing employees. And I think that's something that's valuable to share with other national statistical offices as well.
Okay. So, well, I just would like to say that let's hope this is going to become a regular tool for management of NSOs, and to be complemented also with the other very important one we used to apply, like task or others. And just to finish, I will give you like half a minute or between half a minute and a minute if you want to send a message for our audience. Starting with Maria Esther.
Thanks, Jimena. No, all to say in this moment is thanks to IDB for that initiative. Really, it's an important measure that we need for what we do, no? And it's incredible that an institution like us never measure that kind of things of their employees. Even we know that the work of our employees impact in the results of our work. No? So I congratulate to Jose Antonio, Christian, for that initiative. I hope it will do permanent in the future. No? Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Esther. Christian, please.
Thanks, no, thanks everyone just for your interest in the survey. And if you have any other questions that we weren't able to respond to right now, always feel free to email us, and we're very happy to try to help. So thanks again for your time.
John, please.
Thank you, Ximena. Well, yeah, thank you as well for the presentation and for the IDB for supporting this initiative. I think as a last message, I think it's a twofold one. On the one hand, I hope that those who have attended see that, in fact, these surveys have a huge potential. They provide you with a lot of very valuable evidence, and you learn a lot about your organizations, and you can do a lot with that. It can inform your own policy-making reform efforts much more. But at the same time, I think that's also important to recognize. It's important to think about all those employees of those organizations. It gives them voice. And they like that. I mean, especially when we have gone to countries for the first or second time, employees are very positive towards this. It might take parts of their working time, but yet they are very rarely asked about what's going on in their organizations and how they feel about management. This is an opportunity to give voice to employees, and they like it. So it's a very good way of collecting evidence to make things work better.
This is a very good point. And also the importance of feel free in terms of expressing this voice, as you previously was saying. And finally, Jose Antonio, maybe you could at the same time answer the last question, which is, what would be the ideal frequency at which you would advise the survey to be done?
I think the frequency I'm going to leave to the experts of this kind of surveys, remembering that this is a survey adapted from other, from the public sector to NSO. So I think the question of the frequency, I don't know if Christian, what you will see on what you have done in your experience.
Right, so you can either run it, so most governments run these types of surveys either annually or every 2 years. I think the key thing for thinking about frequency is, when are you interested in evaluating change? And I think that should guide when you run the next survey. So imagine you found a problem in the survey. You did something that you hope addressed the problem, a new training program, a different way of recruiting people, a different way of evaluating people. Once you've done that and you want to find out whether it solved your problem, that's the time to run the next survey. So it's partially driven by your needs, management needs, but most countries do it every year or every second year.
Yeah, just to share my experience, I applied another type of survey once, and it is true what you say. Annually is a short time in order to see the result of the programs that you implement after the first round of result. So I guess every 2 years, if you have the time to do it, would be an ideal period. Based on my experience, of course, every country is different. So finally, Jose Antonio, your last word.
Thank you. This might sound like a cliche, but cliches are always true, right? This is not a test to see what's wrong. This is an opportunity for managers of national statistical offices to see where things need to be improved in order to improve not only the well-being and the capacities of the employees, but eventually the statistical capacity of their NSOs. So I hope that it's seen in that way, and that it that it's helpful in that way. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the 16 National Statistical Offices of Latin America and the Caribbean that are participating, and to the employees, particularly of these NSOs, that are giving their time for this exercise. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you to all of you, and thank you to our participant. Just a last message: we will revise the questions you have done and prepare answers in case there are some of them that were not answered. And also this session will be posted at the IDB website pretty soon in case you want to revise it. So thanks again to all of you, and let's hope to see you again with another survey or with the result maybe, right? Okay, bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.